Well, this is the second installment about phase two of the Holocaust, the violent phase. And I've called this on our notes just a section of who knew what when about phase two and the violence. Because that's something that most of us always want to know. Was this completely secretive? Did anybody know of what was going on? With the thought in our minds that certainly if people would have known, they would have had to have done something about it. And this horrible event, where nearly 12 million people in total were killed, might not have been as bad as it was. So, what did people know and when did they know it? Well, first off, we start with those who lived in Germany, non-Jewish people. It says the Germans, certain aspects of the Nazi persecution were common knowledge. Phase one of the Holocaust, the legal phase that segregated Jewish people in certain parts of town, that made rules that said Jewish doctors couldn't see non-Jewish patients, or told Jewish school children that only so many could be in a certain school. Everybody knew of these laws. The German citizens knew of them. They were exposed to them. That was not secretive at all. That event called Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass in 1938, that marked a change in focus, a violent change in focus, where the Jewish community was fined money and 20,000 Jewish men were arrested. That was all public knowledge. People knew the violence that was happening against Jewish people. So to say that, well, they never knew anything, they certainly knew most of what was going on in phase one of the Holocaust. Now, it's in phase two, the violent phase, where not everybody knew everything, but certainly many people knew something. Now, it says here, the Nazis did attempt to keep the final solution secret. It was impossible, however, to not notice the disappearance of thousands of people, or maybe your friends who lived in a certain part of town. Many people did not know where Jews had gone, but many Germans had definitely participated in the removal of these citizens. So, you might one day wake up and on your way to work, you go by a certain street where many Jewish people live, and no longer do you see people on that street anymore. You might not know where they've gone, but you know they have left. And you know with the past Nazi propaganda and beliefs about Jewish people that it's likely something negative can happen to them. Well, what if you worked at a train station? If you worked at a train station and you were guiding the trains in and out, you had helped people get on those trains to be sent to Eastern Europe, you certainly knew something was going on there. So this idea that German people might have said, we knew nothing that was going on, is partially true. They didn't know the details, but is completely false when they said we didn't know anything. Next, what about Jewish people? Well, certainly Jewish people would have known what their ultimate fate was going to be. Well, that is a yes and a no. It says here that like other Germans, Jewish people knew of the laws that were restricting of them. They had to know of them. They had to abide by them. And they certainly knew about that first violent event, Kristallnacht. They knew that. Remember, the Germans wanted the Jews to know how bad life was for them and how unwanted the Jews were in Germany, so they would try to emigrate. But many did not know of the final solution. This campaign to murder millions of people was a secret and definitely kept a secret to Jewish people. I guess the thinking probably was that the more Jewish people that might know their ultimate fate, the more resistance, the more trouble that the Nazi government might have on its hands. So best, I guess, to keep people in the dark of what was going to happen to them. Just tell them that they were being resettled to a certain part of Europe and things would be fine. It says next that at some camps, Jews were forced to write letters back to friends and family that might be living in other parts of Germany or in other countries, basically saying, hey, we've been resettled, everything is fine, no need to worry. Of course, that's not true about the need to worry, but they did send letters. Jews had also remembered that it was Germany that had, when push came to shove, had saved Jewish people from the very harsh government of Tsarist Russia. I guess you could say that Jewish people had a difficult time at best, and I guess maybe a lot of people, a difficult time wrapping their head around the idea that a certain group was scheduled for mass murder. As a matter of fact, Jews were very much a part of German society before the Nazis took over. Jews had been very successful on some level in German society, and Germany was looked upon as a very cultured place. A cultured place, a civilized place, definitely is not the location that we would consider negative things happening. It says here, Jews outside of Europe were aware of the mistreatment because of the news before the war got started. But once the war began, getting information was really difficult. But by December of 1942, news of the final solution had made it out of Europe. People who had seen what was going on had sent information to the Allies, so by late 42, we knew what was happening there. But efforts made to help the Jews immigrate and aid sent to them was really, really poor and very much lacking. Finally, what about the Allies? America, Great Britain, for example. What did we know? Well, just like everybody else, the early events were public knowledge. However, news stories about the early events were generally not on the front pages of newspapers, places in newspapers where people might not even bother to notice. News of the final solution was known by late 1942 and did make it into newspapers. Unfortunately, though, efforts to help were poorly inadequate. Help for immigrants was really small since many countries were anti-immigrant and anti-Jewish. That's America, for example. Once the war got going, immigration really, really slowed down, and any kind of help really, really took a back seat because the main focus was to win the war, at least for America, well, for everybody as well, but for America, defeat the Japanese, defeat the Germans, and helping Jewish people took a back seat. It was not until 1944 that the Allies did anything to help by establishing a war refugee board. But there were no attempts at all to rally the European populations to resist against the Germans in the Holocaust. There were no attempts made to bomb railroad lines that went to these camps. No attempts made at all to even bomb the camps themselves. Jewish leaders in Washington, D.C. begged with President Roosevelt to bomb the railroad lines going to camps, to bomb the camps themselves. Now, certainly that would kill people who were in the camps, but it might put a camp out of business for a long period of time. We had the ability to do this with our Air Force, but we chose not to. That's the end of this portion of Phase 2.